I live up in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. For those who don't know, it's a historical site when it comes to horror movies, being that it has the mall where they recorded the original Dawn of the Dead back in 1977. The town itself isn't that different from any other, but the type of people we occasionally get passing through can certainly be interesting. There's the occasional tourist group, horror convention, and several Romero tributes. All I'm saying is that we're pretty used to seeing weird stuff around here. Not like every day, but more often than I'd like to admit. So when I first saw a flyer for something called the Traveling Graveyard, I didn't give it a second thought. However, it happened to be taped to a wall just outside of the Indian restaurant where I waited in line for my Friday night tikka masala, so I gave it a look. It took me a few seconds to even realize what it said. It was such a strange collection of words, like raspberry shoes, hug missile, or bright black. I had to look closer, kinda like you did when you clicked this. I took a picture of the flyer, got my order, and made it back to my car. I could tell it was gonna rain. I spent some time checking the picture in my car, zooming in on the details I might have missed. The flyer had a simple vector graphic style picture of a tombstone with an elderly couple standing behind it. They were leaning against one another, smiling and looking straight forward. At first it looked fine, but once I zoomed in, I noticed little discrepancies. For example, they had too many teeth. I could count several rows of them. Another was that the woman in the picture, who at first looked like she was leaning on her husband, was actually grabbing him by the neck. The Traveling Graveyard, it said, with coming this Friday to Monroeville, printed in small letters underneath. There was an address, and a bunch of company logos at the bottom. Honestly, I didn't recognize any of them, but it looked legit, like some kind of sponsored event. I figured it might be a movie premiere, given the town's history. Lucky for me, the address was on my way home. I could swing by and just catch a glimpse. I hadn't heard of any big projects being filmed in the area, but sometimes those things can fly under the radar. Then again, it could be a club or some kind of opening event. There was no way to tell. I sent the picture of the flyer to my buddy Henry, who immediately called me up as I pulled out of the parking lot. The guy lives for horror stuff. "What the hell is it?" he spurted out, not even saying hello. "No idea. Checking it out on my way back." "I'll meet you there." "You don't have a car." "I'll bike." He hung up before I got the chance to ask him about it. Had no idea he even knew how to ride a bike. I made my way to the address. The road was mostly gravel, leading through a small forest passage just outside of town. Still pretty central. I could see the lights in the distance. I heard something up ahead and noticed that I wasn't the first car to arrive. And there it was, just around the bend, the Traveling Graveyard. The place used to be a field for dog agility competitions, but I hadn't seen any arranged for quite some time. Now it was a graveyard. At least 4 dozen tombstones, all neatly arranged. A black cast-iron fence surrounding the area, and an honest-to-God church waiting at the end of a long dirt path. No haunted house Halloween decor, just an actual graveyard that had sprung out of seemingly nowhere. Some cars came, others went. When the crowd settled, I counted 9 other people who were curious enough to stick around. They'd stepped out of their cars to take pictures and chat. Some thought it was a kind of promotional thing, others were convinced it was a movie set. When Henry finally arrived, he was practically blue in the face. I stood there leaning against the hood of my car, having my tikka masala, and it took him a solid 3 minutes before he could even talk. When he finally did, he almost threw the bike in a trench. Old thing. Nothing short of a miracle that the chain hadn't rusted shut or broke on the way here. You're driving me back," he wheezed. I just nodded, my mouth full of chickeny goodness. I pointed down the road towards the church. "Hell of a set," Henry grinned. "What you think? Lionsgate? Universal? What? The production money, man. Movie magic. This is, big time. Which one you think it is?" I couldn't answer. Henry seemed convinced already, but I wasn't so sure. If this was a movie set, why would it have that genuine graveyard smell? The soggy grass, the fresh dirt. You can't put that on screen. I finished up my Friday dinner and joined Henry inside the gates. There was a couple ahead of us who were the first to go through, and I could tell they had to make an effort to get in. The gate wasn't just a prop, it was solid iron. Henry just oohed and awed, not paying too much attention to the details. For example, there were no names on the tombstones. They looked real, though. We followed the others inside, walking all the way up to the church. It was a strange building, much smaller than a modern church. I couldn't imagine it being 2 pews wide. It was tall, though, and had a looming bell tower. I looked up to see if I could spot anyone up there, but it was getting too dark. The gathering rain clouds weren't helping. Henry elbowed me, pointing at the church. A little help? They were pulling the doors open. It took 3 of us to do it. Good thing we did, as the first drops of rain just started poking at us. We all gathered, expecting some kind of event manager to reward us for our curiosity. Maybe some movie swag or something. But as those doors swung open, there was nothing. Not a soul. Just dusty old pews, badly insulated stained glass windows, and an empty altar up front. Not a single cross or Bible to be found, but plenty of dry and dead moths. The place was either ransacked or half-finished. Henry seemed to think the latter, while I was leaning more to the former. The peeling paint on the walls wasn't there just for show. It was old. Probably lead-based, too. "This is some the nun kind of shit," Henry whispered reverently. "Holy sh... This might be a preview screening." "Henry, I know you like the fucking view up there, but pull your head out of your ass," I snapped back. "This is not a fucking movie set." "Like hell it ain't," he chuckled. "Look, see? Plastic flowers." He picked up a flower from under a pew, only to realize that it wasn't plastic. It was dried. A strange, dry, tinted sunflower. The rain was picking up outside. Some of the others turned around to go back, but most of us stuck around to explore the church. We were already invested, and this trip had to mean something. Pennsylvanians aren't about to waste their Friday night just because someone decided to drag them out into nowhere. If anything, they'd be leaving with the communion wine and calling it a good one. I wasn't all too convinced, though. Some of it just looked a bit too real. Checking the pews, I could see little scratched-out letters and numbers. There were a lot of years marked, but none of them seemed to date past 1890. There was also a whole slew of names hastily scrawled on the walls, possibly by children, judging by the height and legibility. At least a dozen names. Boys and girls, no surnames. I stepped back out into the rain and called my buddy Luke. Reception was a bit spotty, but the call got through. "Yeah?" he answered, trying to speak through the static. "Hey, can you look something up for me?" "What?" "Look something up for me." It took me 3 tries to explain to him that I wanted some info on the traveling graveyard event. Maybe we'd seen the wrong date, or there was some kind of misprint. This was clearly the right place, but it didn't seem like the right time. Luke said he'd look it up and call me right back. I stayed outside for a while, huddling under the roof. I looked down the path leading up to the church to see if the others had already made it out. I figured they had, since I couldn't see them anywhere. Then again, their cars were still parked outside. And another thing. The gate was closed. We'd left it open. Why would they close it? I had this sinking feeling that I was missing something obvious, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Like that feeling when you leave home, convinced that you're forgetting something important. I looked around, letting my eyes drift over the tombstones, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Then again, the rain was making it all harder to see. Henry joined me just as Luke called me back. I kept getting disconnected the moment I pushed to accept the call. It got dropped over and over 3 times in quick succession. On the 4th, a weak signal came through. I could barely make out what Luke was saying. There was so much interference that most of it came out sounding like he was stuck in a microwave. A few words pushed through, mostly asking things like, "What the fuck?" and "What are you talking about?" It didn't take a genius to get that he had no idea what we were talking about, and that this event was unheard of. I tried yelling the address back at him if he wanted to check it out himself. I spelled it out over and over, but he just couldn't hear me. Finally, as the 4th call disconnected, I texted him instead. I was surprised to see that it went through. Henry just sneered at me. "I don't like that look," he said. "What's going on?" "Where did the others go?" I asked, brushing some rain out of my hair. What? What others? The guys who left. There was like 4 or 5 of them. Oh, they went out back, I think. Henry took me back inside, pointing to one of the stained glass windows. He was right. I could see a bunch of people walking back and forth between the graves. There was only one problem. There were 7 of them, not 4 or 5. Henry counted them with me, and the other remaining people in the church stepped up alongside us. We could barely make the others out in the rain, but it was clear that there were a few too many. Maybe more came by, someone whispered. Maybe they're the event people. Can't see more cars, someone responded. Were they always there? Did we check? And finally, as we all quieted down, I heard Henry whisper, "What the fuck are they doing?" That's what we were all thinking. They were all just standing there, seemingly immobile. They weren't running for cover or leaving altogether. They just stood there, as if held by some invisible will. Puppets, waiting for their strings to be pulled. Then, from the other side of the room, a whisper. There are more on this side. At least 8, possibly more further in. No idea where they came from or what they were doing. If anything, they looked more like statues than people. For a moment, we all just stood there trying to imagine what the hell they were trying to do. Finally, the couple who'd stepped in ahead of us chimed in. They were leaving. I was inclined to join them, but something told me it was a bad idea. Besides, Henry wasn't ready to let me go just yet. If anything, he was getting excited. This all seemed like part of the event to him. Instead, the rest of us gathered at the open doors, watching the 2 wander into the rain. Only me, Henry, and this 16-year-old-looking kid remained indoors. Once they got halfway, they turned to us and screamed. It was so damn fast. They came from both sides of the building, beelining straight for the 2. 16 bodies in total, all drenched by the rain. I could make out some vague shapes like a girl in a white dress and a tall man with a black suit. They weren't really running. It was more of a strange walk, like their entire body was on a swivel. They rolled their spines back and forth, having their necks bobbing back and forth. One of them fell over, smacking his head on an unmarked grave. The couple made a run for the gate, but it was too high to climb. They tried helping one another, one stepping into the other's hands, but it was too late. Some kind of instinct wanted me to run out there and help them, but I didn't. I just stood there, waiting to see what would happen. They grabbed the man first. He was still holding up his arms, trying to get his girlfriend over the iron fence. They lifted him off his feet in what looked like the most casual effort, and a second later, they threw him, straight up. Like a balloon taking flight, he accelerated upwards, past the rain, the clouds, and into the sky. He kept tumbling back and forth, weightless and desperate. He flailed like a bird with a broken wing, but it was useless. I could hear him screaming as he went higher and higher and higher. His panicked screams faded into the rain. They only managed to grab the woman by her foot, but it was enough. It's as if she was put into a spin, her head and body drifting upwards as she grasped for the fence. It slipped by her fingers as her piercing death scream cut through my nerves like a hot knife. The higher she went, the more passive the crowd became. They slowed down, and the swivel of their bodies was stiffened into a statuesque, back-straightened stance. The 3 of us just stood there, not knowing what to do. I couldn't move. I wanted to slam the doors shut, but I didn't know what would set them off. I didn't dare to look at Henry or the kid. I barely managed to force air into my lungs. Henry's world had shattered. I could hear him muttering, "What the fuck," over and over and over. He had the look of someone trying to figure something out, but the answer never came. After a few minutes, we moved. We noticed no one came at us. They seemed to have gone back into some kind of inactive state, and nothing seemed to rattle them. At one point, Henry almost laughed. The adrenaline must have gotten to him. "It's fine," he said. "We got this." Before I got the chance to say anything, he knocked on the door. Both me and the 16-year-old looked at him like he'd signed our death sentence. My heart leapt out of my chest, but nothing happened. He knocked, and they didn't even turn around. "Get your head straight," I whispered. "You're not just messing with your fucking life." Henry just smiled through his teeth, but I could see he was just as scared as I was. Pupils wide, short, shallow breaths. Hell, the 16-year-old was probably the only one of us actually paying real attention. She was short, with black hair, some kind of pixie cut, and had a nose ring. She kept looking back and forth, both between the two of us, and at the crowd gathering outside. She tapped my shoulder, forcing me to make eye contact. "Help me with this." We started dragging one of the doors shut, but it was way too heavy. It had been one thing pulling it open with dry dirt under our feet, but now with the rain it was getting downright difficult. It wasn't until Henry got out into the rain to push that we made some progress. But the moment he stepped into the rain, they all turned towards us. Like a motor spinning to life, their movements became animated. Every limb a fluid motion, heading our way with complete abandon. They stumbled over one another, over the graves, slipped in the mud, but kept going forward. We both grabbed Henry and pulled him in, and the moment he stepped inside, they stopped moving. All three of us tried to catch our breaths. Henry's manic smile was still plastered on his face. He'd cracked, hard. "It's the rain," said the pixie-cut girl. It's something with the rain." Using my belt and plenty of patience, we pulled the other door shut. There was no lock, but as long as we kept out of the rain, it seemed simple enough. The bodies outside weren't paying us any attention. The pixie-cut girl kept rambling on about whatever wild theory came to her mind. Aliens coming to take us away, some kind of rapture, but it all came back to that one point, that it was all connected to the rain. Henry had other ideas. He figured we ought to just stay inside and call for help, which in itself wasn't a bad idea. It's just that we couldn't get any coverage. Looking up, hoping some kind of god would give me a hint, I stumbled upon an idea. "The bell tower," I said. "We can climb up there." So we did. We made our way to the second floor. The pixie-cut girl was the lightest of us and had the most expensive phone. We figured that rickety old ladder would hold her. We double and triple checked it, and it seemed fine, but she was hesitant. Finally, she just shook her head. "You do it," she said, pointing at me. "I'm not getting up there." There was no time to argue. I started climbing, one creaky rung at a time. When I finally made it up, I could see all through the graveyard. The rain was pouring down, making the roof of the bell tower creak. In the distance, I could see the edge of the iron fence, but everything outside of that was covered by the rain. There could have been a dozen police cars just outside, and I'd have no way of knowing. That's when my phone started buzzing. Missed calls and messages, all from Luke. "Where are you? Hello? Is this a prank? Pick up." And finally, a picture. A selfie of Luke, standing in an open, empty, damp field. I didn't even realize how long I stared at it until I heard a breaking shingle. Drops of water made their way down my spine as a hole opened above. My screen was unresponsive, so I wiped it with my jacket. From downstairs, I could hear Henry's jeering cackle. "Hey, looks like they're moving, buddy. Hurry the fuck up," added the pixie-cut girl. There was a strange sound, like very slow woodpeckers. Something hard hitting the side of the building, over and over again. I dialed 911 as fast as I could, but the damn connect button refused to work. The water was interfering with it. As the call lit up with a green symbol, I saw something peeking over the edge of the roof. She was young, but no child. Eyes hollowed out, leaving empty holes on the inside of her blackened skull. Her mouth wide open, her lower jaw swinging back and forth. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't in pain. And as she dug her slippery fingers into shingle after shingle, making her way up the side of the building, I could tell that there was nothing left of a person in there. All that remained was some kind of instinct-ridden machine, aching to send me on my way. An operator answered, asking me what my emergency was. "I need help," I wheezed. They're going to..." Looking at her, there was no doubt of her intentions. "They're going to fucking kill me." I was so blindly terrified that I didn't even look behind me. Cold fingers brushed against my jacket, long broken fingers reaching my way. A tall man with a suit, his head hanging low. I could see the rainwater pool in the back of his eye sockets, making it look like he never stopped crying as it squelched out with his every move. I recoiled, only to completely lose my balance. I sunk down halfway down the ladder and fell. I landed really bad, putting all the weight on my ankle. I could feel something snap, followed by a tremendous pulsing pain shooting all the way from my heel up my spine. My phone slipped out of my hands and slid across the floor. Henry just managed to catch it moments before it tumbled down to the first floor. He picked it up, yelling at the operator. "Hello? Hey, is anyone... Hello?" There was no response. We could barely get reception down there. In between my thumping heartbeats, I could hear the pounding fists go quiet above. A steady stream of water from above stained the carpet. Giving in to his intrusive thoughts, Henry chucked my phone all the way across the room, breaking one of the stained glass windows. In the aftermath, I did my best to support my, probably, broken ankle. We used our socks as a makeshift bandage, trying to it in place. It didn't help much, but it made it easier to jump on one foot. Still, every movement teased me with a tickle of pain, threatening to send shockwaves throughout my body, tearing all the way up my spine. Finally, the three of us just sat there. I don't know for how long, maybe an hour, maybe two. The rain wasn't letting up. "What the fuck do we do?" I sighed. We can't do shit." "We fucking fight them," nodded Henry. "They're not that fast." "Try that again, but without a fucking car for a brain." "What? We can take them. I told you, we got this." The pixie-cut girl just shook her head and stayed quiet. She was working on something. We were growing tired and sluggish. If we were to do something, now would be the time. Henry had found some kind of iron rod broken off from the second-floor railing. There was some weight to it, but he'd be insane to actually try to fight them with it. The pixie-cut girl had been staring straight ahead all night, tapping her foot. Then finally she spoke out. "I can make that fence," she said. "You got a car?" "Yeah," I nodded. "But you'll come back for us, right?" "I'll ram the gate." It's closed, but didn't seem locked. Henry shrugged his way into the conversation. "No way you'll make it," he said. "They're too close." I looked back at the broken window, then back at the pixie-cut girl. "We can draw them over." We put our plan to work. Henry and I knocked out some more glass from the window, allowing rain to trail in. We could immediately hear movement on the roof as we let the rain soak our skin. We held on, waiting for a clear sign. They started falling off the roof in droves, thunk after thunk of meat just slapping into the dirt. Not a single gasp, twitch, or grunt. We counted the bodies. 11, 12, 13. I prepared to give her the signal. 14, 15. She had pushed the door ajar and was ready to go. 16. She burst into a sprint as we moved away from the window. Henry hurried to the front door and I followed to the best of my ability. She was gunning for it, but there was a problem. There were far more than 16 out there. There was at least double. She kept going, weaving past them. As she finally reached the far side of the fence, she leapt up, putting her foot in the middle of the bar and kicking herself upward. In one swing, she flung her lower body over the fence. "Holy shit," murmured Henry. You think she's okay," I nodded, as if to convince myself. "She'll make it." There was a beep in the distance, followed by an engine roaring to life. Moments later, the gate flung wide open. She drove straight ahead, aiming for the church. At least 8 of them toppled over, being flung left and right, smacking against the hood of the car. She'd almost made it halfway there when I heard this strange metallic groan. The car was slowing down and lifting. It was about 2 full feet off the ground when it started to wobble. The combined touch of all those things seemed to be able to send anything off, even a car. I saw the pixie-cut girl trying to get her belt off, but the added movement just made the car topple over to the side. As it tipped over to the driver's side, I saw her struggle to climb out the passenger seat. The car started to lift again, this time reaching over 6 feet. Finally, the crowd let go of it, as it started slowly drifting upwards, with the pixie-cut girl still in it. She was a full 10 feet off the ground when she finally got out. The rotational force flung her out, making her hang from the passenger side door in midair. Then, she slipped. We watched her slip into the crowd, screaming. And then, just like those before her, she started to drift into the rain clouds. Dozens of hands sent her on her way, holding their arms high, like a silent wave goodbye. Henry nodded at me. "All right then," he said. "I'm going for it." I didn't react in time. He bolted out the door, swinging wildly with his iron rod. He connected with one of them, tearing off an ear and a solid chunk of jaw. Still, that did little to stop them. Luckily for Henry, he was fast, almost fast enough to make it. We just hadn't counted on the car coming back down. Whatever up there took it didn't want it. The car came crashing down with a deafening crunch, taking both Henry and two of those things with it as it belly flopped into the mud. And then there was just me, my screams, and the rain. For hours, I just wandered back and forth on my own. I kept trying to make up a plan in my head, but all I ended up with was this sense of my stomach lifting into the air. That sucking kind of feeling you get when you fall. I had nothing to eat. I sure as hell wasn't going to drink the rain. In the end, I was left with only one choice. I had to try. I stepped up to the open doors, steeling myself for what's to come. I saw the crowd outside, waiting in the rain. They knew there was one left. I did that at least 4 times. Stepping up, backing down. I couldn't force myself to die like that. I just couldn't. Finally, I just collapsed into the front pew, screaming in frustration. Not like that'd move those things anyway. I noticed something under one of the pews. The couple who'd been first inside had forgotten a small bag. Apparently, they'd anticipated bad weather as there was a folded-up umbrella inside. It wasn't a good plan, I'll admit to that. I couldn't tell how those things worked, but this was the best thing I could come up with, and the greatest chance I had. I unfolded it carefully and tried to step outside, just a little. As the first raindrops hit the plastic, I expected explosive movement. Instead, I got nothing. Inch by inch, I made my way outside. I tried my best to put a smooth weight on my foot, but I just ended up jumping. Taking those little jumps in the mud was close to suicide. One slip up, and that'd be that. I could barely hear my panting breaths over the pouring rain. At one point, I held the umbrella at a bad angle. Some water touched the back of my leg, causing all now 40-something creatures to turn my way in an instant. I stopped, and they did too. Empty skulls all around, hungrily waiting for me to slip up. Little by little, I made my way past them. Some were only a few feet away. I walked past the gate, and I kept walking. I didn't even notice when the rain stopped or the sun came back out. I didn't notice I was back in that dog agility field. I barely even reacted to Luke waving me over from the parking lot. Turns out, everything was gone. Not just the people, but our cars and the graveyard itself. Only thing I could find that showed Henry had ever been there was his rusted-out bike by the side of the road. Maybe the church was never there to begin with, at least not in this world. And yet, it was the realest thing that ever happened to me. They never found the others, or my car, or anything else. Hell, it seemed like pretty much no one had even seen the flyers around town. I tried looking up people who came there and left, but they seemed to have no recollection of ever seeing the church. I've talked to some of them here on Reddit. I checked the company logos on the flyer again, just to try and find some kind of clue. Turns out it was all fake. There were some people who claimed to have seen someone put the flyers up, but all I got was that she looked young. I've never seen or experienced anything like that night. Nothing. But this is why I always keep an umbrella around.